So in the previous video, we talked about color flats, and I kind of went through the process a little bit fast, and I wanted to now go back a little bit slower to show you in a little bit more detail what we actually did. So we've got our base color, and we were able to extract the other colors by bringing up the Hue Saturation panel. What is the Hue Saturation panel? If I were to bring this up on the coyote's muzzle, the hue controls the color. It's basically, you've got your reds, your oranges, your blues, whatever else you want, and you can see the full range. This will generally get you the color that you want in conjunction with saturation. What is saturation? Saturation has to do with the intensity of a specific color. So if I've got this kind of medium beige color, if I really crank up the saturation, it turns orange. If I crank it all the way down to the other way, it automatically goes to a grayscale value. That's going to be important in a future video, so just remember that. And then lightness basically injects white into the color or injects black, and the amount of black or the amount of white is dictated by the slider. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as you work. Okay, that being said, those properties also appear in the color panel, and something else that you want to consider here too is that if I want to now select the entire character for whatever reason, I have this ability to do so. This becomes important when I have multiple objects in my scene that I want to move around. If I hold down the command or the control key and click on the base color layer, it automatically allows me to select the entire character, right? So that makes it easy for me to then add other things. For example, now that the whole character is selected, if I wanted to just maybe flood this in with red and then just drop the opacity to kind of give him a little bit more of a reddish hue, I can easily do that, right? So I can make a quick selection of all the colors that I have in my scene with the purpose of enhancing the colors, and we'll talk more about that later, or adding a texture or doing things along those lines. All right, so now that we've done that, something else about the color panel too. You can actually click on the foreground color and you can get the color picker, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar with that. You will see the usual suspects here: hue, saturation, and brightness. In fact, as I start to move within this color picker area, you can see that the hue is now 0, but then the saturation and brightness take on different values, which is kind of interesting. And then you've got your red, green, and blue, you've got your hexadecimal color, and you've got all the sorts of other things here that you can use. What you may not realize is that there are color libraries that allow you to get even more nerdy with some of your color choices too. And these are the Pantone colors. There's actually AMPA, and there's like Pantone. So if you're actually working on a design that requires specific colors to be used, you can actually go ahead and say choose Pantone CMYK coded, and it gives you the entire range of Pantone colors. So just something to be aware of. You can always use the picker, and then you can go back and pick what you need and then continue working. That color panel is really important. I use this 90% of the time over my swatches panel. My swatches panel, yours might look something like this, or it might have a few more colors that are available to you. And these are good if you want to, if you're working with a very limited color palette, like say for example, pure. But generally speaking, I don't keep going back to the swatches panel. It's just more of a waste of time for me. And I can spend more of my time working on my design than just trying to sample a color. And I can also dial in my color much faster with the Hue Saturation panel than I can by picking a specific color and adjusting it up here. Okay, let's talk about something that I glossed over briefly. So in the previous video, we used the magic wand tool to make our selections, right? So if I were to hide all of the stuff, magic wand tool, Command J, and then we use Command U, and we can go ahead and bring our colors in, right? Now, the magic wand tool, there's a couple of parameters or settings that we had to select. let's take a look at what happens when we alter some of those setting changes. Let's talk first about tolerance. Tolerance has to do with the magic wand's precision. A tolerance value of 1 means that the selection is going to be very precise. Let's take a look at what that means in the context of, let me hide everything that I've got. I'll take my base color layer and I'll bring the tolerance down to 1. Type in the number 1, I'll hit return. I'll make the same selection on the muzzle of the coyote. I'll hit Command J, and then I will hide the base color layer so we can see what happens. So with the tolerance value of 1, as I zoom in, you'll notice that there is a small white line that goes around the entire character. In fact, there are certain areas that are not even filled. So a low tolerance is going to make for a much more precise selection. In fact, if I zoom in really, really tiny, you can see that when I was inking, it's not pure black. There's going to be, because there's pressure sensitivity that's being involved here, the outer areas are going to resolve to a grayscale or something that looks somewhat light. And a low tolerance respects that and will only fill in areas that are purely white. That's why we see this gap showing up. So that's the reason why we have the tolerance cranked to a higher value. Now, I'll just make a note here. This is tolerance of 1. Let's now repeat the same process. We'll go and turn the base color layer back on. And this time we'll crank the tolerance up to, say, 99. And I'll hit return. Now, if I were to select the coyote's muzzle again and hit Command J, Command U, and pick a different color, you'll notice immediately that we don't see that white line. So a higher tolerance is going to be a more sloppy selection. In fact, if I zoom in tightly, you can see that any of the areas that are gray are kind of blending in with that greenish color that I've already used. So that is why we set the tolerance to a value that is not low. Now, are there cases where you want to have a low tolerance? Absolutely. But for what we're going to be doing here, we want the coloring to look uniform. We don't want to have to go back in and have to recolor something that's already been colored. So setting the tolerance usually anywhere between 50 to 99 or 100 is fine. I'm not sure what the overall total range is. Let's type in 125. You can really, I think the range is 255. So if I type in 256, yeah, it says that the range goes up to 255. I've never gone that high. I've typically left it at about 99 or 70. Those numbers can vary. You just have to figure out what makes sense for you. I'm just showing you what the effective tolerance is when you're using the Magic Wand tool. Magic Wand tool is a great tool. It's better than using the paint bucket tool because you have more precision in terms of how the paint fills in that area. So that's a little bit about tolerance and a little bit more meat and potatoes behind what we did in the previous video. If you have any questions, let me know. As always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.